5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right, so we'll start off. Could you please state your name, where you're from, what you've been doing?
So my name is Ned Williams. I'm from Potomac, Maryland, and I ran a boys' school, Mater Dei school, for 38 years.
So you read a lot about your dad, Edward Bennett Williams. Could you describe what he was like, just in general, like something about him maybe most people wouldn't know?
Well, I think most people saw him as this pretty tough trial attorney and super hyper competitive person, which he was. He believed in contest living, which was there's a winner and a loser at the end of things often, kind of a competition. But the truth is, as a father, he was like a friendly teddy bear. You know, my mother was the one who dropped the hammer on us a little bit more than my dad. So my dad liked to have fun. He worked very hard, and he worked 7 days a week. You know, so it wasn't until I was in 3rd grade that I realized that not every dad worked 7 days a week. I went to a friend's house to spend the night, and their dad didn't go to work on Saturday. So he worked very hard. You know, he came to Washington, D.C. with $5 in his pocket and a scholarship to Georgetown Law, and worked exceptionally hard for the success he had.
So, kind of shift focus. Like,
Sure.
to way back. How prevalent? How much did you know of your dad's work life, especially like the Pentagon Papers, and was that ever something discussed at home?
Well, my mother was a lawyer as well as my dad, and she was really she and another woman were the first to graduate from Georgetown Law. So she was a good one. So I mean, I'm not trying to brag about her, but that's just the fact. And so they occasionally would talk about stuff. I would say not till I got older was I aware of his cases. You know, so the Pentagon Papers, no, but Watergate, yes, and any case thereafter. You know, we knew. My dad would go into training, honestly, for a month before a big trial. We wouldn't see him very much at all. He called it like training camp, and he went, and we really didn't see him much for a month before a big trial. So.
Was your mom a baseball fan? Or?
My mom was an academic. I have pictures of her at the Joe Frazier Muhammad Ali fight. She went to all these events with my dad to support my dad. Was she interested in them? No, not really. I think the last game she saw was probably a professional game with my dad. Even with her grandchildren, she loved her grandchildren like no other. But as far as that, she liked to talk about books, liked to talk about what was going on in their life. But as far as sports, not very interested, you know. But she obviously loved my dad, and so she supported him, although she was horrified at boxing.
Were you a big baseball fan growing up?
I think I was a medium baseball fan. Probably my first love was football. I love football.
Was it the Redskins?
It was. And if there was a locker room I grew up in, it was the football locker room. But obviously, you know, a Senators fan, an Orioles fan, you know. But my first love was football.
So there's a famous quote from your dad to George Allen. I'm sure you know it.
Oh, I know it.
I gave him an unlimited budget, and he exceeded it. So that type of wry humor, was that something that your dad, did he still have that like back home, or was that more of kind of his public persona?
Oh, he was like that at home, you know, and he would. One time we borrowed for a prom, a friend of mine and I borrowed a derby hat that he had, thinking we were going to look great at a prom, and he somehow noticed that it was missing. Like, the chances of that are the same as Halley's Comet flying over us right now, you know, but somehow he figured it out. So he called us into his office on Sunday morning and started, asking us questions until he finally worked around to the hat and its whereabouts, you know. So he treated us just like that, you know, funny, super, wanted to have fun with us, do things with us, would tease us, you know, could tease us a little bit. So yeah, you weren't going to outwit him in a little verbal battle. That wasn't really going to happen too often.
Do you remember when him buying Orioles was first discussed, or like, what was your first memory of that, and what was that like?
It was pretty wild, really. You know, I was basically a senior in high school, so it was pretty exciting, you know. It was surprising, honestly, to me, because of our relationship with football, you know, most of our lives. So he loved baseball, loved it. I was at a Navy game this weekend imitating, you know, the beer man, the scorecard, you know, the whole thing, because he would say those things to us regularly as kids, you know. He loved baseball from his youth, so that wasn't surprising, but just that it happened was surprising to all of us.
Did you guys go to Orioles games prior to him buying the team?
We had gone, but really we were Senators fans primarily. He was in 1969. I was a little boy when Ted Williams came in to manage the Senators. He was at our house. They were friends. Joe DiMaggio. What's funny is I didn't know what a legend Joe DiMaggio was and is. I had no idea. I just knew he was the nicest man. He would come and spend the weekend with us. Sometimes, usually he would stay in a hotel, but he would spend a lot of time at our house. There wasn't. I can't describe you would love him. You know, anyone that met him would say what a nice person he was. I didn't realize that he was as incredible a celebrity, I guess is the right word, until we were walking down the street in Atlantic City. We were there for a big fight when I was in I think in college, and everyone recognized him and was jumping out of their skins to see him. I didn't understand it until that moment. It's crazy.
So you said you had a story about your dad buying a team in 1979. Would you be able to share that?
Well, not necessarily buying the team, but there was I guess what was interesting to me was that I think people were worried about him being a Washington, D.C. mayor, you know, lawyer, buying the Baltimore Orioles and moving them. So there was this fear, maybe. He had an interesting relationship with Baltimore because his view as a businessman was he wanted to create more of a regional franchise. He wanted the people of Washington, D.C. to support the Orioles. So in doing so, I think the people of Baltimore got worried a little bit. Like, this guy, look, he opened a store, a Baltimore Orioles store in Washington. They're like, oh, what's going on? You know, is he getting ready to move the team? But, you know, he loved Baltimore, and he was very good friends with the mayor of Baltimore, Donald Schaefer, and he was trying to build the footprint of the team, of the Orioles. So that was just an interesting time when he first bought the team. And I think that some people worried throughout his ownership period, or at least for a period of time. And one of the things about building Camden Yards and signing a long-term lease was that he wanted, before he passed away, he wanted to make sure that the Orioles stayed in Baltimore. That was very important to him because he loved Baltimore. But he also, being a businessman, wanted to have more people in the stands every day. So the way you do that is have more of a regional franchise, like, for instance, the Red Sox. You know, people in Connecticut like the Red Sox, people in Vermont like the Red Sox, people in Maine like the Red Sox, right? It's a regional franchise. And that was his sort of dream for the Orioles, that people in Virginia would root for the Orioles, people in North Carolina might root for the Orioles. You know, that was his thinking.
So, did you see Governor Schaefer over a lot?
I saw him sometimes, you know, but he was a big supporter of the Orioles, a big supporter, and helped with the negotiations.
So, what was it like when your dad was the owner of the team, going to games with him? So where'd you guys sit? What food were you eating? What was going on?
Well, I can tell you this: we got there early, so we were usually there before many. You know, always during BP we were there. You know, we would go to a Redskin game when we were kids, and no one would be there when we got to RFK Stadium. That was we got there a little later for the Orioles games, only because they're night games and my dad worked. You know, he was a lawyer first and a sports team owner second. His view was you hired great people and let them do their jobs. And he knew he had a great person in Earl Weaver when he hired the team. The problem was Earl Weaver told him, we lost a few games early in the year. I think we lost 2 or 3 in a row. And my dad was ready to, you know, jump off a building. And Earl Weaver was like, Mr. Williams, this isn't football. We have 100, I think then it was 148 of these. We're going to win a lot of them, you know. So he had to actually calm my dad down, because my dad did still have that football mentality of you lose 3 games, your season could be over, right? So but we got there early, and he tried to hire the best possible people he could to run the team, as far as player development and as far as coaches and managers.
What was he like in the stands during the action of the game?
Tense. The whole 9 innings, pretty much. Now, he would have friends and guests to the game, and he would entertain them and talk to them, but he was tense during the games, always. Yeah.
Sounds like me. I've already spoken to Bob Flanagan.
Yeah.
And he said that your dad he had this ability to memorize everyone's names that he came into contact with. Did you see that?
Yes. I saw him do an hour and a half closing argument in a case, one of his cases later in life. There was a very complicated case with lots of numbers. You know, it was a tax case. Part of it was a tax case. And he spoke to the jury without looking at a note for an hour and a half, citing wham, wham, fact after fact after fact after fact. So he had basically pretty close to a photographic memory when it came to that. So it was pretty interesting to see. You know, it wasn't unusual for me to see it, but you know, in retrospect, it was pretty crazy.
Did you ever go down to the clubhouse and talk with the players, or like how often would he speak with the players?
That's a good question. Sometimes I think sometimes when things were going maybe a little rough, he would say something, speak to the team, but he let pretty much let the manager do his job, which was his philosophy. That was his general philosophy. And as I said, he was a lawyer, and he wanted to be the best lawyer. He wanted to have the best baseball team, He did keep score, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but at the end of the day, at the end of the baseball game, you do win or lose, and he wanted to win fairly, squarely by the rules. But we're going to do this. Let's win the game.
Do you remember the 1983 World Series run?
I do.
What was that like, being with him, and do you have any specific memories of that summer?
That summer taught me, and I think helped teach him. He knew it, I guess, but that World Series are won with a clubhouse that is united. That with a clubhouse, with a group of guys that somehow become more of a band of brothers, and the team is greater than the sum of its parts. Now, obviously the parts were great, but even the parts of the parts were great. By that, what I mean is we had outfielders platooning. One night, Gary Renicky would play. Another night, in other words, we had different pieces versus different pitchers, So everyone, I think, bought in. There was no selfishness at all amongst anyone involved. The clubhouse was just crazily good. These guys were amazing. And that's just magic, I think. I'd like to say there's some recipe for that you could recreate it every year. But I think sometimes it just happens. And you're talented, and you're injury-free, and you get a little bit of luck here and there, right? All those things come together. But you have to, I think it's almost essential that to win a World Series, you have to have that clubhouse chemistry. And that team was incredible that way,
Did your dad become more tense as the closer it became to...
You couldn't get too much more tense, but yes. Yeah, he did. He, even when we watched the games at home, we wasn't too much joking around. I mean, it was business when we were playing. Between innings, we could, fool around a little bit.
Especially when postseason play comes around, football is happening at the same time. What was that like, kind of going from postseason baseball play to the NFL with the Redskins?
Well, the Redskins in '79, I was a freshman in college, and I'll never forget. The Redskins started the season 0-5. The Orioles in '79 lost the World Series, to the Pirates. I mentioned that my dad liked the fights. My mom didn't like the fights too much. My dad did, and we had a fighter live with us at times, and he was a really nice guy. And he was a little older than I, but we were friends, and he fought for the world title against Maurice Hope in Wembley Stadium in the same fall of '79.
Do you remember his name, by chance?
Mike Baker, yeah, Irish Mike Baker. So I was a freshman in college, right? I went to Holy Cross, where my dad had gone, which was the best decision. I ever made, but as far as schools and this and that, but so the Redskins 0-5, Joe Gibbs' first year. The Orioles losing the World Series, and Mike Baker getting TKO'd in Wembley. And I'll never forget, I got news of him getting knocked, TKO'd in London. The fight was in London. Obviously a big time difference, this and that. I didn't get word. I don't know when I actually heard because there was no internet or anything like that. But I know it was the evening when I heard the result of the fight. And I went out to the Holy Cross is on a hill, and the football field stadium is on the bottom. And I just went into the football stadium and sat down and cried. Because all our sports teams were in hard times, And then, fast forward 4 years, we'd won a Super Bowl. The Orioles win the World Series. Mike Baker never won the world title, but it was just a moment, And you win and lose. That's what happens,
What was that celebration like for your family?
It was just joy for my dad, It was just a happy time. He'd worked hard to try to win and lots of things, right? So, but he felt so happy and to bring a World Series to Baltimore, who, by the way, was used to it in some respects, Baltimore's a proud city, and they took great pride in the Orioles and the Oriole way, the way the Orioles did things, and how the players had come through the farm system, Bluefield, West Virginia. All those great players had come through Bluefield, and so there was great pride in those guys being brought up through the Oriole farm system and winning, Obviously we had a few free agents, but the majority of the team had been assembled through the program, and that was a testament to the ownership before my father and continuing that legacy of the Oriole way of doing things.
So kind of shifting gears over here, what do you remember of Memorial Stadium? Like, when you think of Memorial Stadium, what's the first thing that pops into your head?
I mean, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I drove there almost every day. So if you drive there every day, there's this, a sequence of lights before you get to Russell Street, that if you're coming from 95, you've got to get across town before you turn, down 33rd, right? So every day I would, anytime there was a home game, often I would be making that drive. That drive, the lights were the sequence, right? So you could time those lights. If you got lucky, you could run the whole, I don't know how many miles it was, but it was over a mile of lights. And every time I tried to do it, sometimes it was dead at the first light. I ran that sequence night after night for years, and one time I got it. So that always jumps right into my mind when I think of Memorial, the trip there, right? Not the trip home, but the trip there. And then pulling up and the people, the people that I got to meet in that, nice people from parking lot attendants to the people that ran the press box to guy that ran the elevators. So, I mean, Memorial Stadium has so many fond memories for me, from nice people to the team itself, which was some great teams played there. Incredible teams played there. The Tomatoes, in the outfield. There's just things that stick out about, if you're talking just about the place. But a place is just four walls until you put the people in it, and really it's those people that worked there that were really great police officers that you would see night after night, So those things, and then of course, just being in the box with my dad and Bob Flanagan and Larry Lucchino. I mean, those guys were they were like brothers to me, older brothers. Bob Flanagan and Larry Lucchino, they're such great people, great people, and they were fun, and they had to laugh a little bit about my dad's intensity sometimes too. Yeah, but they were incredible.
So when was the first time you heard about the Camden Yards site being brought up?
Gosh, I couldn't tell you the year. What I know is that, the Memorial Stadium was getting older, and it was a super important piece of keeping the Orioles in Baltimore, to have a place to call that was world class, to give them a home. And I remember, unfortunately, my dad was sick and not able to go, to as many things as games, and he was ill, but he started the train moving in that direction because of his desire to have a long-term deal in place for the people of Baltimore and the city of Baltimore. So I can't tell you the exact moment I heard about it, because it was something that percolated over time. Memorial, as I mentioned, it was fine, you know what I mean? But it wasn't special. There's a difference. Camden Yards, the walls, the place itself is special. Then you put the people in, and it becomes more special, right? So there is a sort of difference, I think, between the two places.
So it's safe to assume your dad felt really strongly about moving out of Memorial Stadium to find a new place?
He did. We wanted to have a place that was a baseball-only facility that had a little bit more soul. I think is what maybe how he might have described it. He loved Fenway Park, thought it was amazing, and he thought, we should have something that feels like that. That is a place that's special for the Orioles, because he viewed them as a very special franchise, a very special thing for the city of Baltimore, especially given the fact that there were no Colts at that point, right? So it was Baltimore, the Preakness and the Orioles were what Baltimore had at that time, sort of for sports, I guess. I mean, those were two of the big pieces that we had in Maryland. So he felt that they should have a really great ballpark, and guess what? They got it. I mean, I think I think if you asked anyone in the major leagues, they would say it's one of the best ballparks in the big leagues.
Did he ever talk about the politics behind getting to Camden Yards?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Donald Schaefer was governor at this point. I think. Yes, and I know that he was very supportive and helpful. He obviously it was important to him that we had a Major League Baseball team, that Maryland had a Major League Baseball team, and had a Major League facility for that team. And so I don't remember the details of the deal making really particularly perfectly, but I know Bob Flanagan and Larry Lucchino and my dad while my dad was living, worked hard to make it happen. And he was very gratified when the deal was, pretty well made, before he passed away. Obviously, it took time to build. And
Do you think the Colts moving out the way they did kind of influenced your dad at the time?
well, I think it, it influenced him in the sense that he didn't want Baltimore to be left high and dry, and he did know that that people were worried. People did talk to him about that.
Were there previous discussions of moving the team out of Baltimore to like down 95 or DC?
Never. Well, I mean, the day he bought the team, people were talking about it, but he never mentioned it. It was not something that he talked about to me anyway. He was committed to Baltimore. He liked Baltimore, He liked the city. He liked the people, and he wanted to make sure that the team stayed there, for well past, because he didn't know what was going to happen after he died. My mother taking over was not an option. That was not going to happen. So or one of us. My parents were they were interested in us forging our own paths. That was important to my mom and dad. So that was not really something that we were going to stay in the baseball business, which.
So I don't know if you remember, but in 1987, there was a hearing in Annapolis, the financial committee, and there's a story that your dad at the time was getting chemotherapy in Boston.
Right.
And that Governor Schaefer called him the day before to show up and testify, and he did testify. Do you know if that story was true, that he called him the day before?
I have heard the story. I just, it wasn't something that I directly remember. I know that he and Donald Schaefer had always been friends, really, and it was important. If it was important for the future of the Orioles, I know my dad would get there. He'd fly there and make sure he was there. I don't know the details of that story. Yeah.
What would you think your dad would say about the Orioles and baseball today, kind of looking back?
It's a great question. I think he would be a little worried about. He would have been worried about the length of games. It's very important to him that the games didn't drag on too long, and I think everyone came to that agreement with the pitch clock and all the changes that have been made. So I think he'd been very, very receptive to the changes that got made, even though he was a traditionalist, at heart. I think he would have been very, very happy to see that. I think he'd want to make sure that our fan base wasn't creeping up the age ladder. I think he would likely be concerned with that and how to make sure we have young fans, and keeping prices reasonable enough for families to go to the games. Or a dad can bring his couple of boys, 3 boys or 3 daughters to the game. Father and son or father daughter can go to the game and enjoy it without. We used to have 2 buck night regularly at Memorial. I don't remember whether it ever carried over to Camden Yards, but we'd have 2 buck night and various nights where it was super affordable to go to the games, and people appreciated that. So I think that would be one question he might have. Are we pricing? And I don't know the answer to that question, but I think he might bring that up. those are just a couple of things I think he might comment on.
So moving to opening day, was that the first time you saw Camden Yards?
It was. I'd seen it from the outside, but I'd never been inside Camden Yards.
What did you think of it when you walked in?
It was an emotional moment for me to go down on the field. It was very different from my experiences of going on the field at the old ballpark, you know. So different. It felt so different. But I just remember looking out and seeing the warehouse wall, you know, seeing that. I was blown away how incredibly Baltimore it was, how incredibly cool it was that they had created this ballpark really right in the rail yards and kept the feel. It just felt so neat and so cool, you know, that was that was just different from the old Memorial. It was, and then there's an awful lot of nice people down on the field that were excited about this new ballpark and the possibility of getting an all-star game there. It was a lot of. I was a little sad though, you know, because my dad didn't get a chance to see it. I think he would have felt so good about two things. One, about the long-term lease that we knew the team was staying, but they also that this is where they're staying. This was part and parcel with keeping the team in Baltimore, having this incredible place for them to play. And I think it's just as incredible. I went to a game last year, and it felt great. I mean, to me, I thought it was still an amazingly exciting place to go to a game. And I've been to games over the years, but it hasn't worn off. And the other piece is my friends of mine who come into town who've never been there, they'll say, this place is great. You know, it's amazing. I don't know what you think of it, but I think it's just an amazing place.
It feels like baseball. At least to me, it's just what baseball is. So when you're on the field, I'm assuming you're with Larry Lucchino.
I was, yes.
What was that like?
I mean, I was just so happy for him. He's as I said, he's like an older brother to me, and he's just such a good guy. And Bob Flanagan, and there was a number of people from the old days of the Orioles there. It was a little bit, you know, emotional for me to be down on that field. It felt a little strange, you know. It just felt a little funny because you are used to the old, you know. But it was just super exciting, you know, because it was such a special place. You know, when you walk into a special place, you know it. And there hadn't been any history there yet, you know. There'd been no history, but you know, we're still got to win a World Series there, you know. But I feel like they've got things headed right there, you know. They have such a good team right now, so I'd like to bring one back there.
What did you think of the architecture, the brick and the steel truss? Not
a home run, not a 2-run shot, not a 3-run shot, a grand slam. You know what I mean? It's a grand slam. It was amazing. It felt, we didn't try to put a spaceship ballpark in Baltimore, you know, at the rails. No. The identity of the park fit the city, and the city fit the park. And it was amazing. I mean, I think it's incredible, you know. And again, I think everyone that goes in there feels it when they go in that ballpark.
So my final question for you is: you've been to opening days many times.
Right.
That opening day, what was different about it? Like, than the previous ones?
Well, obviously, when your dad's not with you, it's a totally different experience. And it was a completely unusual one because everything was new. Everything, right? Completely new. Where you sat, where your view, everything seemed new. The game itself is the beauty of baseball. It was still baseball, no matter where you put it. You can put it in a sand lot, you can put it in an alley, you can make it stickball, but it's still, the game was, that's the beauty of baseball. But it was everything else, it was almost disconcertingly new, even though it was so great. It just would take time, to get used to it a little bit. And then over time, you do get used to it. And it's like any new ballpark. I think you find your little spot and what your best place is, and just the people. You start to meet the people. And again, it was different, very different, but a happy different. There's sad difference and happy difference. And the opening day there was sort of the completion of a dream that, as I said, my dad wasn't alive to see it, but he would have been so happy and proud of that beautiful ballpark that was designed and built there.